the Accurate webinar series, the CXO series. You've been enjoying the sessions that we've been bringing to you so far, and I hope you've been learning from the collective wisdom of all the speakers. Today we have with us Sanjay Padode, Chairman IFI Business School. He'll be talking about reimagining the future of education, a new template. The session will be moderated by Sameer Dharnajani, CEO of Accurate Advisory and Consulting. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. All of you all to please be on mute. It affects the listening and the speaking abilities of everybody. Also, questions at the end. Please use the chat and the Q&A facility that you have in WebEx to put it across to us, and I will share those with Sameer. Right, I would like to now introduce Sanjay. All of you all could please go on mute. Requesting you all to go on mute, please. Thank you. Sanjay Padode is an engineering graduate turned entrepreneur who then pivoted to become an educator. He founded Dataline and Research Technologies India Limited, or DART, which established India's email network, Dartmail, and pioneered India's first online information service and internet service. Sanjay then went on to pioneer India's first real-time financial information dissemination network. After serving 22 years in financial technologies and IT leadership positions, Sanjay took over as the Secretary of Center for Development Education, or CDE, a not-for-profit society which runs the IFI Business School. Since his joining, CDE has grown from 200 students to 2,000 plus students, and from a single institution to 3 institutions, which include the IFI College, the IFI Law School, and the IFI Business School, and has received many accolades and awards for innovation and impact. Under his leadership, the IFI Business School became the 6th business school in the country to be awarded the coveted AACSB accreditation. In 2018, Sanjay founded India's first liberal professional university, Vijay Bhumi University. Sanjay is an electrical and electronics engineer from BITS Pilani. Sanjay, it's an honor to have you here speaking for us. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Rohan, and welcome, Sanjay. It's a pleasure and honor to have you on our Accurate webinar session.
Thank you, Sameer. It's a pleasure at my end as well.
Sanjay, I think it's been a platform where I was wanting to get you on stage, and it's very rare that a professional leader who's been at the helm of the affairs take a plunge, and that too into education. And as Rohan was reading your profile, 22 years into professional leadership, somewhere that just gets into your mind, because you've been kind of, let's say, pioneer in many of these financial technologies innovation, as I was going through, and algo trading, to which we consider today as a very sophisticated kind of a piece of, I would say, technique. You did that way back, almost like 2.5 decades back. And this is what I've been asking to kind of, let's say, know about this thing, and maybe this is a platform. How's been the journey like? And second, what prompted you, what nudged you to get a plunge or take a plunge into education?
Sameer, first of all, let me thank you and NK to bringing me on board. And I think talking about the life journey, yes, it's been about 30 years now, 31 to be precise, since I graduated from BITS Pilani. So I graduated from BITS Pilani, and fortunately for me, I did not have to work for anybody, because me and my colleague decided to set up a startup then. And the reason why we could set up this startup was because of one man. Normally, you know, it's going to be very, very shocking for you guys to hear this, but this gentleman was the general manager of State Bank of India. So in the current times, when you look at the entrepreneurial ecosystem, where you have angel investors, where you have venture capitalists, you have a whole lot of people willing to take the risk and take the plunge with an entrepreneur on his idea or his passion. Okay, in 89, that was unheard of. 89 is a time when Indian economy was not liberalized. And the only aspiration one had after graduating from a college like IIT or BITS was to get and live the American dream. And we were no different. When we graduated, our aspirations were nearly the same. But because of this gentleman in SBI who gave us an opportunity to set up a company. I'm not going to get into the story how it started, but it was this man's nudging that turned us around, and we said, why not give it a shot? So all that we did at that point of time was delay admission by 1 year. So we were playing safe, thinking that in case this doesn't work out, we'll anyway go abroad. But that one year turned into 22 years, and the rest was history. So essentially, it was this one guy that gave us an opportunity. We started a company by building an information system for the stock market. Then we built an online service. Then we went on to set up the real-time trading system and so on and so forth. In this entire journey of 22 years, I had the opportunity of engaging with a lot of people while recruiting them on board. So when I ended my journey in 2010 as an entrepreneur, I actually had close to about 3,000 people working for me. So in that whole journey, I had a lot of people with whom I'd interacted. And in this journey, one thing that always intrigued me when I asked this simple question to anybody, and which may be very true even in today's time, is that whenever I asked, what is your aspiration in life? The only answer that I got was a very comfortable life, a good salary, maybe a good bank balance, maybe a good car, maybe a good house. And some people also said some good spouses. So that's where it ended. And I was wondering to myself that when I started in 89, none of these mattered to me. What really mattered to me was to create a great company, was to create a great product, was to do something different. And a lot of that credit goes to this one gentleman who nudged us and made us think around. Otherwise, we would have been like anybody else. So probably I can consider myself to be one of the luckiest guys. Okay, I won't say that it's me, but it's always the environment that makes you what you are. So when I did some empirical research of finding out why is this that in India, we have very, very restricted aspirations. In fact, one good phrase that I'm borrowing from Pankaj Chandra's book of Building Great Universities is aspirational anemia. We are basically short of aspirations in our life. And we think we are very closeted. And so when I did my empirical research, I realized that it's probably the way the education system works. It's very targeted. We are looking at the next exam and the next class. So, I'm sure a lot of you who are connected would have heard this from your parents. Your parent telling you, beta, 10th standard kar le, life ban jayegi. Okay. Then you get to 12th and he's telling you, not 12th is the limit, please get there. And then you manage to get into this IIT, and then the peer pressure of IIT says, man, just get into IIM, you're done. And then you have the peer pressure of getting into IIM, and then you have the EMI race and all the race. And there you are getting married, having kids. 44 happens in life as age. And when you look back and said, that is the point of time when you get a reprieve to reflect on what happened. So essentially the way we are programmed, it's like very targeted, and we never get a time to think, to innovate, to do something different. And that's where it triggered me off that it should start in the education system. We got to give people the opportunity to discover, to basically do what they like. And I personally feel that if you pursue your passion, the chances of you being successful are much higher than if you pursue somebody else's dream and try to make it yours. So that was something that bothered me. And fortunately for me, my father had invested into a small educational institution. So when I got into Bangalore, when I shifted to Bangalore in 2000, incidentally, this institution was running in a rented premise in Bangalore. When I shifted here, my dad said, why don't you become a weekend manager? And that's how I landed getting into it. But as I started interacting with academics, I got more convinced that it has got to do with the education system. And somewhere down the line in my heart, I felt that if I have to make any change in the society, if I have to do any contribution, I think it would be by making that small delta transformation to education. And that's what got me into education.
Wonderful. So looking back, Sanjay, and this is interesting what you really said, and it's a fascinating kind of a story, what you said. And I'm sure it's been rare that you've opened up in any other platform. Uh, the thing around education, now, I want to cover two facets, and one of the facets is purely something which has happened subtly. I mean, from the realms of regulatory kind of a concerns, the lack of autonomy, to a stage too many kind of approvals, then the whole stifling in terms of the curriculum. We've gone through a whole journey of education, and you've seen more than anyone else. Now, one of the things over there has been the industry, and you can relate to the industry better than many of the other academicians, has gone through a tumultuous change. SMAC came in, exponential technologies. Now, you had this onerous task when you took over the reins and kind of managed this whole educational institute in terms of the growth. The cookie cutter model of following the same system wouldn't have worked for you. And maybe that's why we're speaking today. What were the initial thought processes, strategies you had in mind? And would you like to share any anecdotes how you started in this whole journey of IIFIM being the sixth in the country to get ASCSB accreditation? By no means is a joke. It's like a whole set of, I would say, accolades which goes and effort. Would you like to share in terms of what really went through this entire process of IIFIM getting to this stage today?
So with your permission, let me actually step back. This might be a longer answer, but so let's get back to the evolution of education. So I'm going back. I'm going back in history, maybe about 7,000 years. Okay. So education probably is the most oldest profession in this whole world, right? It was there when the moment a baby is born, the education process starts, right from parenting to the peers, and then it basically goes on. So it's been a very much, it's probably that comes to us by instinct in the whole education process. But the formal education process began with Nalanda University. And Nalanda University was created to be a place where, that time there was no printing press. So essentially there was no way to disseminate information. So essentially Nalanda University was a big library where scholars came in, did their research from other people's research, and created their research and put it back. And therefore it became a collection of knowledge. And the whole university was nothing but an institution that was a repository of knowledge. Then move forward. So this got burnt, etc., whatever happened. And then the formal university came in sometime in the last 200 to 300 years in Germany, where they created the system of the university giving degrees. Now that came into picture primarily because of the Industrial Revolution. We required people to work in the companies and employees. So we needed some kind of credentials. How do I go and recruit a person? How do I see whether the person is qualified? So this became a certain more addition to the knowledge came the skill addition, okay, in the university business. And if you look at today, where you're talking about skills being also going redundant with robotics and those kind of things coming into play, essentially the earlier skills were machining skills, drawing skills, painting skills, writing skills. All those sort of are practically getting redundant day by day. And with robots coming into picture, education had to focus more on attitude. So it became the KSA, Knowledge, Skill, Attitude Framework. And going forward, it's going to be more of attitude. Okay, so that is education history in general. When I come to India, in 1991, India got liberalized. So we were forced to liberalize, and Manmohan Singh, being the finance minister, liberalized the country along with Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. In that liberalization, we forgot one thing. We liberalized the industry, but we didn't liberalize the education. And so the license was removed off for industry to go completely grow out. The license Raj remained in the education and continues to remain even today. And that created a lag between the academic world and the industrial world. So what happened in the academic world? Because it was a license Raj, it became basically an opportunity for a few connected with the politics to create educational institutions. And yes, we have seen a lot of these large institutions that I'm not going to name, which come from that kind of background. But these people were not doing it for the business of education. They were more wanting to get into the education business. What I really mean was they were trying to reap the dividends of education rather than really impart education to the country. So there was not there was no innovation done between 91 and 2000. That is the time when I got into the seat of IFM. So let me go to the first day. When I went to IFM, the first question that I asked is, how have the academics, the faculty out there created their curriculum? How have they arrived at the curriculum? The answer that I got, which is the typical answer you would get into any management institute, is we are following the IIM curriculum. Because we are a management institute, so I said, we are following an IIM curriculum. I said, why would you follow an IIM curriculum? The students that you're onboarding are not the same kind of people that IIM gets. IIM gets 1 percentile, the top 1 percentile of CAT, while we get probably the 30th percentile, which is 70 percentile. So the kind of IQ, the IQ that they may have, or the passion to actually, or the hunger to be a management graduate that they have is completely different. And the ability to absorb knowledge by a very highly motivated person is very different from the ability of a person who's not that motivated. So I said, are you setting this curriculum for IIM, or are you setting this curriculum for a student? And when
But if I may chime in at that stage, because what you have said has a kind of a reality check. When the IIMs started, we were catering, if I go back to that period, to what we say, creating those general managers of the companies like Britannia, ITCs, and others. To the stage when 2000 early software boom came in, we talked about IIMs talking about churning the software geeks, as we call it. Did the story change after that, or do you believe they were in that zone that nothing will change? So I just want to correlate in terms of what, those pivots happen where you said, look, this will change, and this is the future forward scenario of the education, the management education in the time to come.
So if you go back, IIMs were created to create the managers for the public sector. So we were a socialist country, right? We set up these these public sector units, and we needed people to man these public sectors. So if you look at pre-70s and even pre-80s, a lot of the people who graduated from IIMs ended up joining State Bank of India, Bank of Baroda, or the Gales or the SAIL, all those kind of organizations. Okay, 91 liberalization is where the competition in IIM really began. So when I was in 89 graduating out of BITS, CAT was not at all aspirational for me. I don't think not more than 10,000 people wrote CAT at that point of time. When you compare it to today, 200,000 people write the CAT. So the competition just went wild, okay? And 91 came the Britannias, came the HULs, all those guys coming to recruit from there. And that's where the IIMs really started producing the so-called executives. What I was trying to tell you at that point of time is that the curriculum for a very highly motivated, intelligent guy who's coming from IIT, getting into IIM, for him to absorb strategy is quite possible. But for a person who has been a mediocre person, an average person whose calling in life came much later than this IITian, who was not motivated enough to learn as much as that person who's actually done his engineering, gone internship, done practice school, and come there, for him, it'll be absolute Greek to actually get in and teach strategy. The second question is that how many strategy positions will be there in companies? Strategy will rest with the top. The requirement at the middle management is functional people who can be great sales managers, people who can be great accounting managers, people who can be doing things, operations, HR, those are the kind of things. So when I asked this question in IFM, coming back to the position of, to the point of IFM, we realized that it's best to put ourselves in the position of creating functional managers. And that is the point of time we created a very simplistic vision for a mission for ourselves. The mission was nurture holistic, socially responsible, and continuously employable professionals. We didn't have strategy, we didn't have global, we didn't have international, we didn't have any one of those management jargons in our mission. It was a purely functional mission. I wanted to create holistic, socially responsible, and continuously employable professionals. And we defined employability as the ability of oneself to add value to the society, not as saying get a job. So if you have the ability to add value to society at any point of time, you will have an opportunity that can run your house, right? So that was the process. And we said to make this curriculum, let's go and research and bring the difference. So we borrowed something from Indian Military Academy. We borrowed something from some of the unique business schools that were doing some changes like JIMR in Mumbai, some schools outside, and created a curriculum which was very unconventional and non-acceptable to the management fraternity of our country. So that became a second challenge. Having created a curriculum that people would laugh and snicker at, this is not management curriculum, come on, you're doing something else. We thought that let's prove to the world it is not. And that's the time we said, let's take on this audacious goal of cracking the ASASB accreditation. We started a journey in 2013, and we were the fastest in 53 months. That means 4 years and 5 months, we got the ASASB accreditation. And the moment we got stamped with the ASASB accreditation, the world had to accept that our curriculum is absolutely management oriented, because that is the gold standard of management accreditation. And that was sort of an inflection point. So that is what happened, Samir. And going forward from there, once we got the ASASB accreditation, we were able to get a fantastic leadership team in. People who were thinking alike, but probably could not break free because of the way the management thought or the constraint that they had. Here they saw a new environment which was open for them to come and play. So we got like-minded leadership people, deans, directors, who then started evolving the ideas. And then we created this IFM 3.0, which was to look at beyond tomorrow. Now, I'll just give you a few, I just want to speak on this beyond tomorrow. So again, I'll go back into history. AI came in 60s. Okay, so AI was actually discovered in 60 or invented in 60, the way you put it. And AI was on the basis of mathematical models in the past. So in reality, let's take the cutoff as 60. What was leading the world? It was academics leading the world. Academics was seeing the future and the world was following. They were inventing and the world was using in the corporate place. Okay. So the future of work was always determined by the academics. And that's the reason why the Americans and the Europeans benefited. The people who created the technology went into the industry. So they were like born with it. They were AI natives. They were mathematic natives. They're computer natives. You look at the internet, it was born in universities, as ARPANET earlier. So if you look at all those inventions of the past, most of the inventions happened in universities. So academics has always been forward thinking. While in India, our academics has always been a follower, never been the leader. So we wanted to take a leadership position. What's going to happen new in the world? The gig economy, the new age companies, the platform companies. Are we training manpower for them, or we are yet continuing to train manpower for the traditional companies like HUL, State Bank of India, etc., etc., etc.? So we took a conscious call that we are going to position our institute for beyond tomorrow, for new age roles, for new age companies. And that's how the positioning of beyond tomorrow came in. So basically we thought that let's venture into the future and let academic take the leadership position once again. So that was the...
Great. No, so Sanjay, I think you've touched a lot of these dimensions in terms of what I say, going back to the topic of our conversation, the new template. Because now in the hindsight, I could see that you could visualize and also conceptualize in terms of what industry needs would be in the time to come, and better kind of be more preemptive in terms of kind of creating those top practices rather than doing a postmortem. Now, going back, you touched a few times about the research piece, and I just want to pick your brains on this, and we'll do some of these short bursts kind of a thing. One, we just recently read that China has actually far more exceeded the research publication in terms of what they kind of do every year from US, and India is nowhere. So that's one facet in terms of research publications which are being generated by the research students every year. So that means the lack of research innovation in India is hurting us big time. Second, we've got a huge talent base. 34.8 million students passing out every year from high school. But when they take over management education, engineering, which is about 1.8 million, the deployability rate, which you rightly said, is abysmal 18% overall, which is the second. Third, I mean, and I'm being a bit more provocative. The industry and academia still have a gap. How do you see these three things getting to a stage while you rightly said we were late in liberalizing education? But even if what's happening today, there are three of these large gaps I see today, which I really want to kind of have you kind of talk about. What do you see these things in terms of kind of getting change, which to us would be the next level of education in the time to come?
Fantastic. But let me first, touch on the point of China. Let me tell you, Chinese have been experts in gaming everything. They have even gamed the research game. The only impact research that they have done is coronavirus. The only impact we have. I don't think of a single new invention that China has ever come since the time they have created. I can't think of any. If I'm missing out, I don't know.
Maybe that's the reason they've accelerated the digital transformation which the CTOs could do,
Right.
just in the lighter way.
So they have always been in the gaming business to be gaming the ranking. But come to your question on the gap between academia and the corporate world. I think it is an artificially created gap. And I'm going to make a very provocative statement.
Sure.
Let's go back to 89 when the liberalization happened. When the liberalization happened, the jobs that were the most lucrative jobs were the non-academic jobs, right? So the best people who joined the academia were not the best people who graduated at that point of time. It's unfortunate that happened. And those people who wanted to pursue academia and were best went abroad to do that. Okay. So as a result of which our entire academic space got starved. We never got the best faculty. If you were to do a little bit of research in how many IITians taught in IIT, you will know the answer. How many people graduating from IISc taught in IISc in those days, you will know the answer. They all migrated abroad or went to companies. So the next generation, the generation of academics were not the best people from our country, which is what went wrong with our country. If you look at America and Europe, the best brains and the best intelligentsia goes into academics. The people who are, cut out for research, who have the patience to actually pursue a problem relentlessly, get into the academic world and are given a status that is equal to that of corporate. In our case, it's not that. And to protect this space, we created some kind of entry barriers, PhD necessary to teach in academics. So that created the gap where even if the corporate people who said, I want to go into academic now could not enter because they didn't have a PhD. So they would not get a position. As a result, this entire gap widened. And everybody kept staying every institution says there's a gap between academic world and the industry world, academic world and the industry world. But none of the academic institutions ever took the step of, being fearless and recruiting practicing professionals as teachers, which is what change we made at IFIM. So if out of the 42 faculty in IFIM Business School, 14 faculty come with a CXO experience. So we give them a way of entering into IFIM without a PhD degree. But I consider a 24-year experience and a CXO position equivalent or better than a PhD degree because you can bring a lot to class than others. So nobody actually made an attempt to bridge the gap, is my view. That's the reason why this gap exists. Our curriculum is yet archaic. I don't know how many of us, I'm guessing a large number from the corporate world, how many of us have participated in surveys being conducted by academic institutions to find out what next in the curriculum? I think I have never, in my whole 22 years, no guy ever approached me, no academic approached me saying what curriculum change I should make. So there's always
the same. Yeah, you're right, actually. Never happened. Yeah.
And that's exactly what has created this gap. But things are changing now. So the good news is AICTE, UGC are permitting corporate guys to come in. And I think the story is going to be very different going forward. It's just, we'll need about 5 years to catch up on the lost time But I'm sure in this 5 years, our academic world will be as respectful as any in the world. I'm pretty sure, I'm very confident. We are also pulling a lot of faculty back from the US, and especially after this pandemic, I'm sure a lot of people who went to China to do research and to teach in Chinese schools are all going to think of coming back. So there's going to be a lot of change that's going to happen for the good for the Indian academic world, and we will get there soon.
Wonderful. So, Sanjay, there are a lot of questions pouring in, but I'll come to that because this is one facet I want to touch, which is a facet which is much more accentuating the whole future of education. Now, you rightly said, and I think we all heard about this iFirm journey, which is beyond tomorrow, is something which is great. Now, on one side, we are seeing today post recovery, there'll be a new future of work, which has a direct linkage with the future of education. You mentioned rightly about the curriculums being archaic, which needs to get more kind of, I would say, topical. Delivery channels needs to be virtual. Pedagogies needs to change. It cannot be an instructive-led kind of a mode. Educational institutes may become production houses because they have to generate bit-sized content on any given day. Customization of the use cases you talked about, and so would be in terms of what we call nano degrees or kind of, let's say, learn on the go. I think you have already predicted this thing. And that's where the emergence of Vijay Bhumi came in. And I'm sure for the participants, it would be more revealing in terms of really talking about this, what you call a liberal learning, India's first university. Please share how this whole process happened, what made you conceptualize, which we've already heard in terms of forward-looking approach, but what went into this dynamics and what this university entailed in the time to come, please.
So there are two premises to, there are two things that led to the creation of this thought. The first is future of work. Future of work, we all keep talking about VUCA world, which means that we are not able to predict what's going to happen in the next 5 years. This is what impacts us in the corporate world, and we have to take it as it comes, right? So it's 5 years or maybe 2 years, whatever is the prediction that one may have. While here, education institutions have to prepare a person for maybe 25 to 30 years. So when the corporate world cannot predict what's going to happen 5 years, how do you expect education institutions to predict what to teach that will be relevant for 25 years? That's one point. The second point is that the life expectancy by large has gone up. So now people are living, probably expected to live 100 years, provided coronavirus doesn't mess up that dream. Okay, that's different. But I'm saying, keeping that exception out, 100 years is it, right? In 100 years, even if I teach at the age of 25, my knowledge cannot last 75 years. That's point number one. Point number two, would a person who's going to live 100 years going to retire at 60? I don't think so, because everybody has to keep earning a living. It only becomes tough to live through. So he has to keep earning till 90. Would a person be able to sustain the kind of job that he has been doing for 60 years after graduation? Again, that's a big question mark. Maybe we will have to give opportunities for people to pivot their careers. So they might be great programmers, they might want to become teachers, they might want to become artists. When the needs of the life are met, they might want to explore something more to keep themselves going. So that is what the future is all about. And coming back to the point that I said, that education has to nurture attitude. Knowledge is available in plenty. Skills will be replaced by robots. What will remain is the attitude game. Our attitudes are closeted. We are always in a following mode. What we are instructed, we follow. We have to get out of that. We need solution providers. We need innovators. We need people who are thinkers. We need philosophers. We need artists. We need a complete end. So now when you have to come out of this, it cannot be any more engineering and accountancy and doctor. These professions are not the only professions. We are creating professions by the dozen every year. For a university, very difficult to predict which profession to go. The only thing the university has to do is to allow a student to discover the student's passion and facilitate and provide a learning pathway that will help the student excel in that area and encourage the student to pursue that. So that is what that cannot be done in an existing university framework. Therefore, we took the only liberal education framework that existed worldwide, which is best practice, was the liberal arts. But liberal arts was never applied to professional degrees. So what we have done is taken the best of professional, taken the best of liberal art framework, and combined it to create a liberal professional framework. Now, why we did that in India? Because we know the old habits in India will die hard. Even parents now would want their children to become engineer, but I would like them to become liberal engineers. Parents would yet want their children to become business professionals. I would want them to become liberal professionals, where they have done a bit of art, they have done a bit of humanities, and they've also done their specialization in the area of business. And that's where the concept of the T-shaped professional comes. So the horizontal bar of the T is giving them the breadth, and the vertical bar of the T is giving them the depth in the professional area. So that is the concept.
Inch by inch strategy, as we say. Absolutely, absolutely. But Sanjay, here is the thing, and I want you to continue about Vijay Bhumi, but there is a linked question as well on this particular thing. As you rightly said, technology, you can build the best of algorithms, have the best of the cybersecurity features, but the mass adoption needs beyond technology, which is the piece around looking at consumer behavior, what we call cognitive neurosciences, behavioral sciences, the whole aspect of sociology, psychology, anthropology. Now, Vijay Bhumi, as I understand, as a university, have an array and a diaspora of programs which blends together, and there is what I say an aspect of what I want to learn is what I will learn, and I can pick, which I call a la carte model. Would you like to please explain on that, please?
Yeah, so the liberal framework, in the first 2 years of the university program, the student does not have to make the choice of the degree. The student can make the choice of the degree at the end of the second year program. So he has 2 years. A student has 2 years to explore courses from performing arts, humanities, data science, business, law, and design. Communication design to start with. So we have a design school, we have a law school, we have a business school, and we have a school of data science. So from these, a student is mandated to do a certain load of courses from each school, which are the 101 courses, which are the foundational courses. And then the student can probably choose the learning pathway that he wants to take. So it could happen that a student coming from a 12th standard commerce suddenly finds that, wow, I find maths and statistics very interesting. Maybe I must do an engineering in artificial intelligence. Our university will allow that. Or alternatively, a student coming from science says, I want to pursue law, with intellectual property rights as a specialization. The university will allow that. So currently we are a startup university. Our number of courses that we can offer is limited. Except that we have got tie-ups with universities like State University of New York to offer digital forensics and cybersecurity. We have ESCP Europe to offer a international management program. We have University of Texas Arlington to offer a master's in business analytics. So courses that we can't deliver, we are providing them pathways to go to. So they can do 1 year with us and go. Basically, if the thought process is liberal, we have to be liberal ourselves. So we thought that if I can't provide it right now, why should I, stifle the student, allow him to go somewhere else? Though I lose business, but that's not important. What's important is the mission of the university, and that's how we have constructed the curriculum.
Wonderful. I think what for every participant would be interesting, what you rightly said, as student, they have a discretion to pick up what they want to learn in the initial few years. And I keep on relating this particular thing, what my 12-year daughter says, that look, why I need to study geography when I have Google Maps, because the longitudinal and the latitudinal dimensions, I can just see and gauge a location, what it means in terms of looking at any geography. So rightly said that, Sanjay. I want to take two questions which to me are very relevant, and then come back to this new liberal way of, I would say, learning. One question is, and being an entrepreneur, you've also faced that today. Our education system, while there are array of programs, curriculums, still does not breed entrepreneurship. And today, on one, you rightly said, we have gig economy and we have a startup economy. A lot of entrepreneurs fail today because they do not get the right breeding understanding of what entrepreneurship as in learning or a program or curriculum is all about. What's your take on this, Sanjay? And maybe, is there a way this gap can be bridged?
So if you look at the recent, look at the new leaders, okay, let it be Steve Jobs, let it be Elon Musk, let it be Peter Thiel, let it be any one of these guys that we've been talking about as entrepreneurs. Most of them come from liberal education. So Steve Jobs was a calligrapher, right? So he never did an engineering degree, and he created the most valuable company in computer, that's the most valuable company in the area of computers and information technology, Apple. So when you look at that, I think it's the liberalization of the mind that makes entrepreneurs. So when you look at India, and you will see that in India, a lot of entrepreneurs are not so well educated. I think that is an advantage to them because they don't get closeted. If you look at Dhirubhai Ambani, he's probably not done his graduation. Because he's got the ability to think free, and he has got a few people to encourage him, to allow him to do something on his own, okay, entrepreneurship thrives. The moment you start closeting the person and not allowing the person to think free, you are killing entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is like you need to give air, water, and the nutrients to make it happen. And the air and water are basically liberation and freedom, which is what our educational institution lacks.
Can you say that again, please? I think this is interesting. Can you say that again, please, Sanjay, just for everyone's benefit?
So for any life to grow, you require air, water, and nutrients. So in entrepreneurship, the air, water, and nutrients are freedom to think, the ability to take risk, which is freedom from the fear of failure, that if I fail, I should not be treated as somebody who's an outcast. I should be given a second chance. It has to be an environment that has to build, to propagate entrepreneurship. If, let's say, for example, in India, suddenly the banks come out with the regulation, okay, you take a loan. And even if you fail, I won't outcast you. Maybe I'll be willing to give you further loan. Right? So then a lot of people want to chase their dreams. Our biggest fear is today that if once I fail in my business, I will be treated as an outcast, and then I will not have an entry anywhere. And that's what actually keeps us away from entrepreneurship. But let me tell you, India is full of entrepreneurs. We are actually a country of entrepreneurs, except for the elite who are the most educated. The rest are all entrepreneurs because they survive doing something. And it's not that they get a salary every month. They earn it every day. They are innovative. So I've seen a lot. If you observe on the roads when you're driving, people, they will change their wares, what they want to sell. And that's coming by just the thought that I have to survive tomorrow. So this is not selling. I have to find something else to sell. And because he's got the freedom to choose what he wants to sell, that innovation is on continuously. You get into a job and you start thinking freely. You have got a boss who's telling you, no, man, that's your job and just do that. You don't think beyond that. And that's what so you have to give that air. You have to allow them to breathe. And that's what is going to create entrepreneurship. Liberalization will bring entrepreneurship. So one of the key, tenets of Vijay Bhumi University is that we want to create solution providers. We want to create entrepreneurs. We want to create business leaders. We do not want to create employees and followers. And that's why the liberal framework. So it's in liberal in all senses.
Analogy, what was interesting. And Sanjay, for the sake of time, because I have a steady flow of questions coming in, I'm sorry I'm chiming in, but I want to cover, I would say, a range of questions. The second thing which I want to touch, and this is a question relevant and something we haven't covered. India also has one of the problems, and we have many problems actually today, but if you really look, there is this whole mid-level crisis today, what we call the mid kind of a career blues. Technology, if we take an example, has about 4.4 million population in India. 44 lakh is a big number, and 1.7, 1.8 of that, I mean, million of those professionals have closer to about 10 years of experience. Suddenly, with the shift of technology, they aren't relevant anymore, and that's a big number. What's the future of education looks like? Can, as a professional who's got 10 years and being a QA or being a kind of a, let's say, coder whose skill sets and technology, I mean, relevance have been lost, what's the thing which you see or conceptualize or kind of envisage as part of education where they can be actually benefiting out of this? And that's a big number. You know, in India, we have a big challenge on this side.
So as we all know, there are companies like Upgrad, Great Learning, trying to make the most of this by bringing in continuing education. But in my view, that is exploiting that's exploiting the situation for a business opportunity. I think what we need to do is we need to allow our 8-year, 9-year experienced people to go back to school. They have to come back to college and refresh the knowledge. What that will do is that will allow multi-generational people to mix. So like when you look at in a company today, when you're working in a company, there are 5 generations working. Earlier, in the older days, generations used to change every 20 years or 30 years. Today, generations change every 5 years. So if I'm working in a company, I'll have at least 5 generations working over me. And there's a huge generation gap. We need to intermix this generation. The best way is to provide an entry for these people. Like say, if I was an engineer and now 8 years I've been at a job, what stops me from taking a course in accounting? What stops me from becoming a chartered accountant? Nothing stops me. I can refresh my career all over again. So that mindset has got to change. I think it's more got to do with the attitude of people than whether the system provides for. The system provides for. We have adequate infrastructure to bring those people back and refresh them into a curriculum. Now, say, for example, let's look at what's happening right now. We need health workers. Why can't people shift to health? There is no law that says that just because you're an engineer, you cannot become a nurse, or you cannot become a paramedic, or you can't become a doctor. It's just about spending the same years of training, getting the same amount of education and knowledge. Maybe it'll take 5 years of your life, but you have a new life. So I think that culture has to prevail, and universities need to start accepting. Going back to school at an older age should not be a stigma anymore. It should be a very welcome step. In fact, it should be envious. Man, you're going to school. I would love to be there too. And learning has to become a continuous process. It has to be
change, Sanjay, and I'm sorry to chime in. Be coming from the schools, because as our roots, I mean, in terms of our learning, gets educated, we realize that, look, we've been told that, look, this is the stream you need to get into and that's your career. And you rightly said that the mortality rate increasing, I mean, careers cannot be 30, 40 years, it will be 50, 60 years to get going on our livelihood. Over there, are you suggesting that the career tracks, what we pick up, one, cannot be static? It needs to be revisited. And second, this liberal learning, I mean, and you quoted the right example of Vijay Bhumi, would be the catalyst in terms of ensuring that what is relevant is what you're learning, and that will accentuate your career opportunities. Is that so?
So let me start with a simple example, okay? So we ran with this. So we are running from Vijay Bhumi University, you can actually check it. We are running a webinar series called ABCD. Anybody can draw. This is being run by the School of the Design. He's the Dean of the School of Design, Praveen Mishra. Now the basic premise of that is, if I ask you, Samir, can you sketch my face? You're going to be, a little worried. I'm pretty sure, unless and until you're a good artist, you're going to be literally worried. And that is to break that myth. And you won't believe it. I did one class with him and I could draw. So that changed the perspective about myself. It is just the fears that we carry in our mind that are holding us up. Okay, we got to release those and we got to unleash ourselves from those shackles to be able to do new things. And that's what is the requirement of the world. Because even if I say, for example, Today I'm an engineer, 8 years, and I say, no, I want to become a management professional and I'll go into data science for 2 years and do a master's in data science. So I go into data science. If I'm unlucky, 2 years down the line, data science, there won't be jobs. There'll be something else. So I have to prepare myself attitudinally not to be functionally aligned, but to be open to learn to adapt any function and go into the core of what are the intelligences and smartness within me. Am I a great, am I an innovator or a creative guy? Am I a good linguistic guy? Am I a good guy with body kinesthetics? Means can I basically perform? I'm a good dancer. I'm a good, performing artist. Or am I a good naturist? I have to go inside and seek within me what is me.
So, Sanjay, that's a question. Who decides that? In school, we've been told to follow the curriculum. In the whole aspect of, I would say, the college, we are just doing what we've been told. And third, then we've got a people. So, who decides the career, what's relevant and what's not relevant? Rohan, did we lose Sanjay?
Samir, we just lost his video feed and audio, but he's online. I think some issue with his local internet. We'll just give a couple of seconds for him to come back.
Sure. Request all participants to stay put. Just facing some bandwidth issues in the link. Please stay put.
Yes, Samir, Sanjay is back. I can see him on the video. Sanjay, can you hear us?
Sanjay, I think you're on mute.
Sanjay, I think you're on mute.
No, I'm not on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's fine. Sorry. I don't know where you lost me, but it was all about, how the career choices can be shaped up.
Scientifically, there are many ways of doing that. There is I think everyone knows about this theory of multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner. If not, you all should study about it. It talks about 8 intelligences and how to, there's a kind of a test one could take to find out what you're good at. And basis on your intelligences, you can choose which career to take. I think a lot of our entire premise of choosing a career is based on which career gives you the best return economically. It's not on what you can do best for that particular career. And what's changing now is that people want performers rather than seekers of rewards. And that is what, so you need to identify what you are good at and then choose a career rather than choose a career just because that pays you well. Every career today can pay you well. We have heard of even disc jockeys earning a lot of money. We have heard of professions that we thought were wasted professions earning a lot of money today. So if you're good at it, I'm sure the gig economy will pay. Like nobody thought that a driver would earn 60, 70,000 driving a taxi, right? With what happened with Uber. Nobody thought that I could use my flat as rent and earn maybe a lakh if I'm located in the right place as being an Airbnb partner. So those kind of opportunities are coming up. It's just a matter of seeking within yourself what you would like to do. I think opportunities are galore. It's just your mind that needs to be refreshed.
Fascinating. Sanjay, I will pick up 2 questions for the sake of time, and both of these are relevant. So it's a very relevant question, one of that which has come in. You talked about this agile, supple curriculums, and it needs to have a lot of interface with the industry. Do you foresee a consortium of academic institutions, industries coming together, creating a holistic curriculum for different disciplines or streams, and on a certain cadence or a frequency basis, it also gets more agile, nimble in terms of changes because technology is not constant. Do you see something like this happening where at least there is some standardization and maybe a new template of the pedagogy and curriculum coming into the future of education?
Okay, so it's an utopian thought that institutions and companies to come together. I don't see that happening in the future, but what I see happening is faculty and corporate executives working together. So if you look at an institutional framework as well, you will never find institutions collaborating and doing research, but you will definitely find two professors, one from MIT and one from IIT, collaborating to do a paper out. Okay. Similarly, the collaboration is going to be at the human level rather than the institutional level. And the academic institutions will open the gateway for the corporates to come in and share their experience, and also open the gateway for faculty to go and work as interns in corporates and learn their challenges. And that intermix has been done very well in the United States and Europe. We have missed the bus there, but I think that is that is the revolution that we need in our country.
Wonderful. And Sanjay, one more question, and you've touched upon attitude a few times, and there's a question around that. That's something what you said about knowledge, skills, and attitude. How do you go about creating that right attitude? It's about learning. Is it about kind of inculcating, or is it about just taking, I would say, different disparate sources and creating your own kind of an attitude? What's your take on this attitude makeover, if I say that?
It's experiencing. It's immersive learning. It is very experiential. You cannot build attitude only by in a classroom. I think we have got adequate amount of technology sources to do to teach while a person is actually working, and I think we got to leverage that, allow students to in turn work in areas where they can immerse themselves in work and impart education using technology. They can come to our university for doing the labs, but they have to be more out working with the society, and that's where the attitude builds up. To build a good attitude of a lawyer, it cannot happen in a classroom. It has to happen in the courtroom. And to build a good attitude of a doctor, this is the right time when, health workers are working to put that student there, looking at all the emergency cases coming. And that is going to really create the right attitude of service. I think it's got to be immersive and experiential.
Perfect. Sanjay, we would have loved to continue, but we are at the top of the hour. Unfortunately, we'll have to kind of stop out here, but thank you so much. And I think one of the feedback I was getting from constant feedback from many of the participants, Sanjay speaks like a corporate leader. And that's, I think it's a unique in terms of doing a session with an education kind of an academician head, and same person is talking like a corporate leader. But Sanjay, the nuggets of wisdom, as we call it, SP's nuggets of wisdom, have been immense in this session, thought-provoking, very kind of, I would say, forward-looking, and maybe the audience would have got now the taste of what I call a new template of future of education. Thank you so much for your time, Sanjay. Really appreciate, and thank you all the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, NK. Thank you, all of you, to bear with me. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Stay safe.
Thank you.